right, we are going to continue with our big idea. Knowing what numbers mean helps me to compare things and solve problems. Today we're going to be working with thousands, looking at decimal numbers that go into the thousands. So let's take a look. This design contains 100 small squares. So if we were to look at this, this would be 100 small squares. What fraction of the design does each color represent? Well, we're just going to look at the pink. And if we look, there's 2 less on each side, there's 10, so that means there's 2 rows of 8, so there'd be 16 out of 100. We're going to compare this now, or look at this now, as out of thousands. So what that means is this little square actually has 10 little 10 little squares in it, which would make this now out of 1,000. So again, it's taking that same amount and dividing it differently. All right, so let's take a look at your connect section. We can show numbers with thousands in different ways. Again, we could show them in base 10 blocks. That gets quite difficult with thousands because you have to draw the cubes. So, for example, here we have 3/10ths, 400ths, and 5,000ths to represent this decimal number, which would be said as 345 thousandths on a place value chart. We don't have anything in the zero place, so we don't need to say zero. And as a fraction, it would be 345 out of 1,000. And of course, as a decimal, it would be 345 thousandths. When it comes to a number that has a digit in the ones place, we're going to have a cube be the ones place, a large cube. We have 0/10ths, so we don't need any flats. We have 1 rod for our hundredth and 3 thousandths for our thousandths place. So that would be our base 10 way of showing this number. In a place value chart, we could have 2 decimals, 0/10ths, 100, 3 thousandths. This number would be said as 2 and 13 thousandths because the 3 is in the thousandths place. Couldn't show this one as a fraction because it has a number in the ones place, and that would make it a mixed number, which we get into in grade 6. So when it has a number in front, don't call it anything like that. All right, last one that we have there. We have only 8 tiny cubes, which would make it 8 thousandths. The 8 is in the thousandths place. All other places are 0. We would just say that as 8 thousandths place. Place value chart, those would be filled with 0. As a fraction, it would be 8 over 1,000. And as your decimal, remember it would be 0.008, and you do need to have those zeros in front. Again, if we have a fraction that is not out of 1,000, we can make an equivalent fraction in order to put it into a decimal format then. So for example, say we had 1/2. We wanted to make it all the way into 1,000. Now that's a little tricky to do right off the bat. So often we'll put it into either tenths or 100 and then go from there. So if I'm going to make this into an equivalent fraction out of 10, because I know with a decimal I can make it into an equivalent fraction out of 10. 2 times 5 is 10. What I do to the bottom, I also have to do to the top. 1 times 5 is 5, so it would be 5/10ths. Now, if I want to get that all the way to the thousandths place, well, to get from 10 to 1,000, I actually multiply by 100. And remember, we can use our annexing 0 to help us there. 1 times 1 is 1, and we add the 3 zeros, so we know that that's going to make 1,000. And again, what we do to the top, what we do to the bottom, we have to do to the top. So 5 times 100, and again, we can annex 0. 5 times 1 is 5, and then we have to add in our 2 zeros. So 500 over 1,000, which then I can very easily put into a decimal number. We would have 0 decimal, and then 500, we need it to end in the thousandths place, which it does. Let's take a look at another example. Here we have 2/5ths, and we're going to make it into something out of tenths. Again, we're going to multiply by 2, top and bottom number. And that gives us 4/10, which is equivalent. From that, we're going to make it into a thousandths. 10 times 100 is 1,000. So what we do to the top, we have to do to, or so what we do to the bottom, we have to do to the top. 4 times 100 then is 400, so 400 thousandths, which we can very easily then write into an equivalent decimal. You can also write a decimal into expanded form. So here's our decimal. We have 3.248. So we would just write it as 3 plus 0, 2. So now our 0 is in front as opposed to expanded form with large numbers. Our decimal and zeros need to be in front. So next we would have 400ths, which would be 0.004. And we would have 8,000, which would be 0.008. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit more about equivalent decimals, which you've already done. If we have 30 rows of 10, that's like 30 out of 100, because we would have 10 rows of 10, and that decimal then is 0.30. If we have 3 out of 10, that would be 0.3. And if we have 300 out of 1,000, that would be 0.300,000. And again, those are all the same amount, it's just divided differently. So we could have a very large thousandth grid where each of those little squares is divided in 10, and we could have 3 of those little squares, 3 of those rows filled in, which would be 3/10, which would be 30 little squares, which would be 30 hundredths, which would be 3,000 tiny little squares, which would be 300 thousandths. All right, so we're going to do some practice. First, we're going to just look again at our place value chart. And notice there's a pattern. So we have our tenths, our hundredths, our thousandths in this order. And we'll notice that in our place value chart on the other direction where numbers are getting larger, we also have that same pattern. We have our ones that kind of divides it. Then we have our tens, our hundreds, and our thousandths. Remember, when it goes into a decimal number, we need the THS on each at the end of each in order for it to be considered a decimal number. Otherwise, it would be considered a whole number, and then the value changes greatly, the amount. All right, so you're going to do some practice here. You're going to write the place value of the given number. So tell what place value the 3 is in, the 7 is in, the 5 is in. Press pause and do that now. All right, so let's take a look. Here we have 3, and the 3 is in the second place after the decimal, which would make that the hundredths place. And in the next one we have the 7, and the 7 is up here. Now be careful, don't think of this as a decimal. Remember, in the States they put their commas instead of spaces. Here is our decimal, and just a hint, no number can ever have more than one decimal. So if there's 2, you have to look at it carefully. One of them is probably a comma. And don't ever put more than one decimal in any of your own numbers that you're working with. Only one decimal per number. So that means this 7 is way in front. We have the decimal place, so then our next place is the ones, then the tens, then the hundreds, then the thousands. And this is not a decimal number, so the 7 is not in a decimal place value position, so it's just thousands, no TH. If it's TH, that means it's after the decimal, and it is not. It is in front of the decimal, so no TH. Then we have this 5, and the 5 is in the place right after the decimal, so that would make it the tenths place. All right, next question. Write the digit that is in the given place value. So take a look. What digit is in the hundreds place value? Write it down. What digit is in the tenths place value? Write it down. And so on. Go ahead and press pause and complete those 6 questions right now. All right, let's take a quick peek. So here we're talking about the hundreds place. What digit's in the hundreds place? Well, this is the hundreds place, so it is a 4. Note that's hundred, it's not hundredths, so it's in front of the decimal. Here we have the tenths place. It has the th, so it has to be after the decimal, and we know our first place after the decimal is the tenths place, so it would be a 1. Here we have the thousandths place. After the decimal, it has the th. Thousandths place, well, we have the tenths, we have the hundredths, we have the thousandths. Voila, it is a 5. Next one, the hundredths place has the th, so it's after the decimal. Hundredths place would be, well, this is the tens. This would be then the hundredths, so it would be a 4. Thousandths place, again, so it's after the decimal. We have the tenths, in the 5 and the tenths, the 2 and the thousandths, sorry, hundredths, and the 3 in the thousandths. So it would be 3. Here we have again the tenths place, and we know the tenths place is the first place after the decimal, so it would be 0. All right, we're going to do some practice with our decimal numbers to the thousandths. We've seen our decimal numbers shown in a number of ways. We've seen it shown in words. We've seen it shown in a place value chart. I'm just going to go PV chart, it's a little shorter. We've seen them in expanded form. And we've seen them in fraction form. Now we're going to show each of these numbers in a specific way. Now the only thing here is that this one has to be the fraction form because it cannot have a number in front to be shown in fraction form. So let's do this one in words, this one in expanded, and we'll switch this around and do this one in place value and that one in fraction form. Go ahead and press pause and try that now. All right, so let's take a look. 8.506 in words would be 8 and, for the decimal, 506, 506, and then we need the name of the last place value position, which is thousandths. And we need to have the ths on the end. Now we need our place value chart. Oops, no, sorry, this one was a fraction. So this one is a fraction. And again, it can only be this one because we have a 0 in the ones place. We can't have a number in the ones place become a fraction. So again, we have this ending in the thousandths place, so that means our bottom number needs to be 1,000, and the top number is just the numbers after the decimal, 4, 5, 6, so 456 thousandths is how that would be said. All right, this next one we were going to do in expanded form. So we need each place value position, so just 3. We could put the zeros on the end if we wanted. It really wouldn't make a difference. Plus, and there's nothing in the middle, so we could put the zeros in there if we wanted, but again, we don't actually need to. Plus the 6, which is in the hundredths place, so 0.06 must have that 0 there. Plus the last one, which is the 7 in the thousandths place, 0.007, so the 7 is in the thousandths place. Could be written up and down vertically like we've been doing as well. So 3.000. You could put those zeros in if you wanted. 0.06, and we could have that 0 on the end too if we wanted. 0.007 key, we need to have that plus sign for all of those, and that's how we could write it in the up and down format there. And this last one was to be in a place value chart. So we know we have the ones place, so we need that. Then we have the decimal, then we have the tenths place, the hundredths place, oops, sorry, and the thousandths place. Again, sorry, that goes over the edge there, but we can draw lines in between if we want. So the 4 is in the ones place, the decimal needs to be there, the 8 is in the tenths place, the 7 is in the hundredths place, and the 5 is in the thousandths place, and that's a decimal number in a place value chart. All right, now you're on to the concept practice, page 185, 186, numbers 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, and 8. You are reading and writing decimals to the thousandths place now. Remember, if you have questions as you are working, that you please ask. Either myself, if we have an EA in the classroom, or if you're at home, you can ask your parents as well. Or a classmate, actually, in the classroom as well. All right, and again, for those of you who sometimes forget your textbook, here is the first textbook, page 1 and 2. And there's 3, wasn't quite fully visible before. And here is the second page, 4 to 9, fully visible right now. And there you have 10 to 13 with the reflect. So if you've forgotten your textbook, press pause and use the video pictures of them.